Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a shocking development that has once again shaken the fragile balance in the Middle East. Reports from multiple sources confirm that a sudden and intense ambush by Hamas fighters in the early hours of the morning has left at least 8 Israeli soldiers injured, just days after talks of a ceasefire had given many people hope for a brief moment of calm. The situation on the ground has dramatically changed within hours, and it now appears that the ceasefire deal, once seen as a pathway to temporary peace, has completely collapsed. This event marks yet another escalation in a region already burning with tension, anger, and mistrust. As the dust settled after the attack, emergency sirens echoed across southern Israel. Military helicopters were seen rushing to evacuate the wounded from the scene, and the Israeli Defense Forces immediately launched a retaliatory response. According to initial reports, the ambush occurred near the Gaza border, where Hamas fighters allegedly used improvised explosive devices and small arms fire to target an Israeli patrol unit. The suddenness and precision of the attack suggest careful planning, and it raises serious questions about how such an operation could be carried out so soon after a declared ceasefire. Israeli officials are calling it a premeditated violation of peace terms, while Hamas insists that it was a defensive action provoked by ongoing Israeli incursions into Gaza's buffer zones. For the people of both Gaza and Israel, this incident has reignited fear and uncertainty. Many residents in southern Israel have taken shelter once again, worried that this could mark the beginning of another round of intense conflict. The atmosphere is thick with anxiety as Israel's security cabinet meets to determine its next steps. Some political leaders are already calling for stronger retaliation, saying that Hamas has crossed a red line. Others urge caution, fearing that another major escalation would undo months of back-channel diplomacy. But on the streets, emotions are running high. The images of burning vehicles, injured soldiers, and chaos at the border are spreading fast on social media, fueling outrage and frustration. The timing of this ambush is especially significant. Over the last few weeks, international mediators, including Egypt and Qatar, had been working tirelessly to broker a truce that could at least stop the daily bombardments and give civilians a chance to recover. The ceasefire was seen as a fragile but necessary step toward humanitarian relief. Yet now, with this sudden breach, all those efforts seem to have crumbled overnight. The humanitarian situation in Gaza remains dire, with electricity shortages, limited access to clean water, and hospitals struggling to treat the injured. Every new clash pushes the region further into chaos, making the hope for long-term peace seem more distant than ever. Eyewitnesses on both sides describe a scene of confusion and panic. Local residents near the border heard heavy gunfire followed by explosions, and within minutes, columns of smoke could be seen rising from the area. The IDF immediately sealed off the zone, preventing journalists from entering, while drones hovered overhead to monitor any further threats. Hamas sources claimed the operation was a response to recent Israeli drone strikes that had killed several of their members earlier in the week. They argue that the so-called ceasefire was never fully respected by Israel in the first place, accusing the Israeli army of conducting aggressive surveillance and targeted raids even during the truce period. Meanwhile, Israeli officials are presenting a very different version of events. According to military spokespeople, Hamas deliberately exploited the ceasefire window to regroup and rearm. They say the ambush was a deliberate attempt to provoke Israel and derail ongoing diplomatic talks. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has vowed to respond swiftly and decisively, while emphasizing that Israel will not tolerate attacks on its soldiers or civilians. His words have set the tone for what could soon become another large-scale military operation. Behind closed doors, there are already reports that Israel is mobilizing reserve units and moving additional artillery toward the border, signaling preparations for possible retaliation. Across the international community, reactions have been swift but cautious. The United Nations has called for restraint from both sides, urging them to return to dialogue. The U.S. State Department expressed deep concern over the breakdown of the ceasefire and has called on both Israel and Hamas to avoid steps that could escalate tensions further. Egypt's foreign ministry, which has been acting as a mediator, has reportedly sent urgent messages to both parties to prevent further clashes. However, these diplomatic appeals often fall on deaf ears once violence erupts on the ground. Each side continues to blame the other for breaking the truce, creating a cycle of accusation that makes real progress nearly impossible. Inside Israel, public opinion is divided. Some citizens believe the government should launch a strong military campaign to reassert control and restore deterrence. Others fear that more violence will only bring more suffering and strengthen Hamas's influence. Families of the injured soldiers are demanding accountability, asking how such an ambush could happen despite Israel's advanced intelligence systems. There's growing frustration among residents in the South who feel they are constantly living under threat. The repeated pattern of ceasefire announcements, followed by renewed fighting, has created a deep sense of hopelessness among the people. Many now question whether peace is even possible in the current political climate. In Gaza, the situation is no less complex. For civilians there, every new Israeli strike means more destruction and displacement. The infrastructure, already devastated by previous wars, struggles to sustain even basic services. People line up for food, fuel, and medical aid, while hospitals remain overwhelmed. Many residents say they no longer trust any ceasefire because they believe Israel will always find a reason to attack again. Hamas leaders, on the other hand, portray the ambush as a symbol of resistance and defiance, claiming it proves that their fighters can still strike back despite blockades and constant surveillance. That message, aimed at both local and regional audiences, resonates with those who feel oppressed and unheard. As the news of the ambush spreads globally, analysts are beginning to weigh in on what this could mean for the future of the conflict. Some experts believe that Hamas's decision to carry out this operation might have been strategic, intended to test Israel's reaction and measure how far the government is willing to go amid political pressure at home. Others see it as a desperate attempt by Hamas to maintain relevance after losing ground in previous confrontations. Either way, the outcome is likely to be more instability. Israel's leadership, facing internal criticism, cannot afford to appear weak, while Hamas cannot afford to appear submissive. The result is a dangerous stalemate driven by pride, politics, and pain. On the streets of Gaza City, life continues under the constant hum of drones overhead. Parents try to comfort their children as the sound of distant explosions becomes a nightly routine. In Israeli towns near the border, Families sleep in bomb shelters, checking their phones for updates on whether another rocket attack might be coming. Both sides are trapped in a cycle that repeats every few months, a flare-up of violence, an uneasy truce, a short-lived calm, and then another eruption. Each time, the casualties mount and the distrust grows deeper. This latest ambush also highlights the failure of the international community to find a sustainable path to peace. Despite years of negotiations, aid programs, and ceasefire agreements, the underlying causes of the conflict remain unresolved: territory, sovereignty, and security. Without addressing these root issues, every attempt at peace is bound to fail. The people who suffer most are the civilians, who have nothing to do with the politics, but everything to lose in every exchange of fire. For them, peace is not a political slogan but a desperate need, the difference between life and death. Back in Jerusalem, tensions are rising within the government itself. Some ministers are pushing for a more aggressive stance, while others warn that a prolonged military operation would invite international condemnation and risk alienating allies. Netanyahu, who faces mounting pressure from both the opposition and the public to demonstrate strength, yet also faces the challenge of avoiding a humanitarian disaster that could damage Israel's global image. The situation is a tightrope, and every decision carries massive consequences. At the same time, Palestinian factions are reportedly meeting in secret to coordinate their next moves. While Hamas remains the most dominant group in Gaza, other militant factions are watching closely, ready to join in if the conflict escalates further. This creates an even more dangerous dynamic, as multiple armed groups with different agendas could turn a localized clash into a full-scale regional escalation. Israel's intelligence agencies are already on high alert, monitoring for signs of new rocket preparations or cross-border infiltration attempts. Internationally, the incident is drawing renewed attention to the broader Middle Eastern power struggle. Iran, which has long supported Hamas and other militant groups, has praised what it calls the resistance operation. Meanwhile, Western countries are condemning the attack and reaffirming Israel's right to self-defense. The diplomatic chessboard is shifting once again, with regional powers using the conflict as leverage in their own political games. In this sense, what happens on the ground in Gaza often becomes part of a much larger geopolitical puzzle, one that extends far beyond the local battlefield. For journalists and humanitarian workers, access to Gaza has once again become extremely limited. Foreign media outlets are relying on local correspondence and satellite imagery to piece together what's happening inside. Reports suggest that Israeli airstrikes have already begun targeting suspected Hamas positions, even as calls for de-escalation continue from abroad. This cycle of action and reaction shows how fragile any ceasefire truly is when trust is completely absent. The 8 injured soldiers now being treated in hospitals symbolize the human cost of political failure. Their families wait anxiously for updates, while across the border, Palestinian families mourn their own losses from retaliatory strikes. Each side views the other through a lens of pain and anger, and every new tragedy hardens hearts even more. Over time, that emotional damage becomes harder to repair than any destroyed building or broken road. As this story continues to unfold, the world watches yet again as hope fades into despair. What was supposed to be a period of calm has turned into another reminder that peace in this region remains one of the world's most elusive dreams. The ceasefire that many celebrated only days ago now exists only on paper, its promises drowned out by the sound of explosions and gunfire. Until both sides find the courage to break this endless cycle of vengeance and mistrust, the same headlines will keep returning